Geometry, if you want the farewell, you need to know the parallel lines, they never touch, they're always the same distance apart. It's as if they don't like each other much, and there's only one thing they...
Hello and welcome to the Kearney Math Show. Thank you all for tuning in today. On today's episode of the Kearney Math Show, we are going to be featuring a brand new unit all about geometric properties. So before we get started, if you'll take just a moment and write entry number 1 at the top of your mini lesson and read your learning goal. So I already have entry written in there for you. So guys, by the end of today, I want you to be able to explain to someone else the special angle properties and how you can use special angles to help you find missing angle measures, okay? So before we dive into trying to find missing angles, we are going to start with just some really important vocabulary words, okay? And these vocabulary words you're going to see throughout this entire unit. So we're just going to spend some time talking about what those vocabulary words are. And you may already have heard of these. And if you have, I challenge you to pause the video and go ahead and try to fill in what you think supplementary, complementary, vertical angles, adjacent angles, and congruent angles are. And then after you get done, play the video and see if you were correct. Okay? So we're going to start with supplementary angles. So supplementary angles are two angles that add up to 180. 180 degrees. And if you notice, what does 180 degrees look like? It's a straight line. So that means you can always look for any two angles that are on top of a straight line. So take, for instance, this. We see that there's a straight line there, and we've got that straight line that's broken up into two angles, angle A and angle B. And those are supplementary. Okay, that means that if I were to tell you that angle B, let's say, was 70, could we use that to help us find angle A? Yeah, we know that they're supplementary. So 70, the supplement to 70 would be 180 minus 70, which is 110. So we know this one would have to be 110. So anytime two angles add up to 180 degrees or they're on top of a straight line, they are known as supplementary. Okay? Moving on to something very similar, sounds similar, but there's something very different known as complementary, okay? When you hear complementary angles, what's the root word you hear there? Compliment. So what does it mean to give someone a compliment? Complimenting is saying something nice to someone. And I've always been told that saying something nice is the right thing to do. So how I remember the difference between complementary and supplementary is I remember complimentary, complimenting someone is the right thing to do. And what is a right angle measure? 90 degrees. So complementary angles are two angles that add up to a right angle, which is 90 degrees. Two angles that add up to 90 degrees. So for instance, if I were to tell you that angle B here was 30, and you know that angle A and B are on top of that right angle, you know they're complementary, they are add up to a right angle, add up to 90 degrees. We could work backwards and we could figure out that if B is 30, then 90 minus 30 means A has to be 60. So an example of two complementary angles would be 60 degrees and 30 degrees, okay? So we've got complementary angles. Complimenting someone is the right thing to do. So two angles add up to 90. Supplementary angles, two angles that add up to 180 degrees. And then if we move on to the next special angle property, vertical angles. Now, when you hear the word vertical angles, when I look at that root word, I hear something that sounds similar to vertex. Okay, and that's exactly what vertical angles are. Vertical angles are when you have two lines, for instance, this line here, and another line that intersect. You see that we've just created 4 different angles. And if you look closely, the angles that are across from each other, if you look here, this vertex here, sharing the same vertex of the angle across from it. And what do you notice about those 2 angles? They're the same. So vertical angles are 2 angles that are across from each other. 2 angles that are across from each other and share the same vertex. Okay, but more specifically, what's super important, and I'm going to actually write this in red because it's super important, vertical angles are congruent to each other, meaning they're the same. So vertical angles are equal or are congruent. Okay, so if I were to tell you that this little angle up here was 40, then what do you know this angle across from it is? That's also 40. Okay, if we went a step further, because they're vertical angles, if we were to go a step further, you see that straight line there? Okay, if we know that this angle here is 40, could we use that to figure out what this angle is, since it's on top of a straight line? 40 plus what gives me that straight line? That would have to be 140. And if I know that one's 140, do you realize that it's vertical to the one across from it, which means this one also has to be 140. Okay? So angles are just, it's like a big puzzle, really. And if you've got one piece of the puzzle, you pretty much can figure the rest of it out. Okay? So we've got supplementary angles, 2 angles that add up to 180. Complementary angles add up to 90. Vertical angles are across from each other and are congruent. And the next are 2 really simple adjacent angles. If you hear adjacent angles, you just hear the word adjacent, which just means beside. So 2 angles that are beside each other. So for instance, if you have angle A and B, they are adjacent to each other. Just kind of like Miss Wilkinson's room is adjacent to my room, we share that common wall. So 2 angles that are beside each other share that common side. Okay, Miss Mabry's room is adjacent to my room. We share that common side. Okay, and then the last, but certainly not least, congruent angles. Congruent is just a really fancy word for angles that are equal. They have the same measure. Okay, so we said earlier that vertical angles were congruent. So if you know that 2 angles are, like for instance, if I had a straight line, another straight line, and I knew that we have angle A, B, C, and D. If I knew that angle A was 120, what other angle do I know is congruent to angle A? That's right, angle C. So I know that angle C is also 120. Okay? So supplementary, 2 angles add up to 180. Complementary, 2 angles add up to 90. Vertical are across from each other and are congruent. Adjacent beside each other, and congruent angles are equal. Okay, so I'm just going to do a couple of practice problems and then we'll finish up together. Okay? So if you look, I'm not going to finish this one, but I'll just kind of get you to look at number 1. Okay? It says find the value of x. So if you look, what do you notice that those 2 angles, angle x and angle 30, are on top of? A straight line. And what do we know a straight line measures? 180 degrees, which means these 2 angles are supplementary. So if I know that this angle is 30, can I work backwards to find angle x? Yes, I can do 180 minus 30, and I know that that's 150. Okay? But they're not always going to be that simple. We're going to get to some more complicated ones. So I'm going to help you get started on a complicated one, and then we'll do more together. Okay, so I want you to come down to number 4. I want you to consider that with me. Number 4 says find the value of x. So we're trying to figure out what x means, and what I have is I have a picture. And what do you notice that this picture, those two angles, angle x and angle 2x plus 30 are on top of? They're on top of a straight line. So we know that together, if we were to add those two angles up, I'm trying to do a very good job drawing a straight line. If I were to add those two angles up, they should give me 180 degrees. They are supplementary angles, okay? So I know that if I were to take angle x and add it with 2x minus 30, if I were to take both of these angles, this angle and this angle, they should give me 180 degrees. So I can set up an equation and solve for that value of x. Okay, and just like we've been doing with equations, we're going to simply try to find what x is. Okay, so we look and can we simplify anything? Do you see any terms that I might combine before I start solving? Yes, that's the x and plus 2x. So we have 3x minus 30 equals 180. We want to get rid of that minus 30, so we would add 30. But whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. I cancel out. I'm left with 3x equals 210. 3 times what would give me 210? So I can work backwards and divide by 3. So x, 210 divided by 3 is 70. So that means that this little angle here is 70 degrees. Now, what if it went a step further and it asked you to find that other angle? What if it asked you to find what angle, let's say this is A, B, C, and D. What if it asked you to find angle C, B, D? So C, B, and D. Okay, that would be the 2x minus 30. Okay, there are 2 ways I could go about that. I could simply find what's the supplement to 70 to give me 180. Or, since I know what x is, I can actually plug 70 in for x. So I could have 2 times 70 minus 30, which is 140, minus 30, which is 110. Okay? Now, how could I check to see if those two are right? What do I know that those two angles should add up to? That 70 and that 110 should add up to 180, which it does. So we know that is correct. Okay? So, just to recap, we've talked about what are complementary angles. Remember, complementary, 2 angles, complementing someone's the right thing to do. So 2 angles add up to 90. Supplementary, 2 angles that add up to 180. Vertical angles are across from each other. Congruent angles are equal, and adjacent angles are beside each other. Okay, and so we can use those special angles to set up equations and find any missing angle you would like to find. Okay, it's kind of like putting together pieces of a puzzle. And so right now, if you want to start on any of the practice problems and give it a try, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have when you come to my station. All right, good job, guys. Make me proud. Peace out, Rainbow Trout. Love you, mean it.